The archives of Salem County, New Jersey, contain hundreds of documents that authorities have tried to suppress for over a century. Between 1876 and 1883, 16 young men vanished without explanation from the same prosperous community, all sharing one disturbing connection. They had recently come into modest inheritances. What investigators uncovered in the winter of 1883 would expose not only one woman's twisted obsession, but an entire network of corruption that reached from the lowliest boarding houses to the most powerful families in the state. The case of Eleanor Blackwood would reveal how a community's willful blindness allowed a predator to operate in plain sight for years, protected by wealth, charm, and the unspoken rules of Victorian society. Before we continue with Eleanor Blackwood's reign of terror, subscribe to Echoes of Darkness and click that notification bell so you never miss our explorations of America's hidden horrors. Let us know in the comments which state you're listening from. We love connecting with fellow history enthusiasts across the country. The winter of 1883 would prove that beneath the polished veneer of post-Civil War prosperity, monsters walked freely among respected society, and that in the quiet corners of New Jersey, the law's reach often stopped at the doorsteps of the wealthy. By 1883, Salem County had transformed from a quiet farming community into a thriving commercial center. The Civil War's end had brought new prosperity, with textile factories and glass manufacturing bringing wealth that reshaped the region's landscape. Fine homes lined the streets of Woodstown and Salem City, their gas-lit windows glowing amber against the winter darkness. It was a place where family connections determined one's future, where fortunes could be made through the right marriages, and where young men with promising prospects were considered the most valuable currency in social circles. Eleanor Blackwood understood this better than anyone. At 35, she had established herself as one of Salem County's most enigmatic socialites. Unmarried but not considered a spinster, she occupied a unique position in local society. Her family's fortune, built through shrewd investments in the emerging railroad industry, afforded her an independence that few women of her era enjoyed. The Blackwood mansion stood on 5 acres of carefully landscaped grounds just outside Woodstown, its 3 stories of red brick and white columns visible for miles across the flat farm country that surrounded it. Eleanor was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her features were too sharp, her gaze too direct, her manner too assured for Victorian sensibilities that prized feminine delicacy and submission. But she possessed something far more powerful than beauty, a magnetic charisma that drew people into her orbit and held them there through a combination of charm, generosity, and subtle manipulation. Men and women alike found themselves eager to please her, to gain her approval, to be invited into her elite circle. Her salons and dinner parties were the most coveted invitations in 3 counties. Politicians, judges, business leaders, and society matrons competed for spaces at her table, where the food was exquisite, the wines imported from Europe, and the conversation carefully steered by their hostess toward topics that revealed her guests' weaknesses, ambitions, and secrets. "Eleanor knows everyone's price," people would whisper, half in admiration, half in fear. "Cross her at your peril." Few realized how literal that assessment was. Behind Eleanor's social prominence lay a carefully constructed operation that selected, groomed, and ultimately disposed of young men with the precision of a scientific experiment. Her methods were so sophisticated, her network so extensive, that she managed to claim 16 victims before anyone connected the disappearances. Thomas Reed was the 17th. At 25, he had recently inherited a modest sum from his grandmother, not enough to make him wealthy, but sufficient to elevate him from clerk to potential business owner. Handsome without being remarkable, educated without being brilliant, ambitious without being ruthless, Thomas represented the solid middle class that was expanding in post-war America. He had plans to open a bookshop in Salem City, had begun courting the daughter of a local physician, and seemed destined for a comfortable if unremarkable life. Until Eleanor Blackwood noticed him at a charity event in December 1882. "Mr. Reed," she said, approaching him with the direct manner that was her trademark, "I understand you have literary aspirations. How fortunate. I've been looking for someone with your particular sensibilities." The invitation to catalog her extensive library came 3 days later. The salary she offered was generous enough to delay his bookshop plans temporarily. The private quarters she provided in the east wing of her mansion were more luxurious than anything he had experienced before. The attention she showed to his opinions, his tastes, his ambitions was intoxicating to a young man accustomed to being overlooked by society's elite. "You have remarkable potential, Thomas," she told him during one of their evening discussions in her private study. "Most people can't see it, but I can. I've always had a gift for recognizing hidden value. Her study was unlike any room Thomas had seen before. The walls were lined with glass-fronted cabinets containing curiosities from around the world: Egyptian scarabs, Chinese jade figurines, tribal masks from Africa, and scientific specimens preserved in jars of clear liquid. A massive desk of polished mahogany dominated the center of the room, its surface always impeccably organized with correspondence arranged in precise stacks, each secured with different colored ribbons. But most striking was the collection of daguerreotypes and photographs displayed on one entire wall, each in an identical silver frame. Dozens of young men stared out from these portraits, all appearing to be in their 20s or early 30s, all dressed in the height of fashion from various periods stretching back decades. "My special projects," Eleanor explained when she caught Thomas studying them. "Young men of promise whom I've had the privilege of mentoring over the years. You'll join their ranks soon enough." Thomas didn't notice that not a single one of these projects remained in Salem County. He didn't question why a woman of Eleanor's standing would take such interest in obscure young men of limited prospects. The attention of someone like Eleanor Blackwood was too flattering, the opportunities she offered too tempting to invite skepticism. Had Thomas been more observant, he might have noticed other troubling details about his new position. The way Eleanor's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, avoided meeting his eyes. The locked rooms in the mansion's third floor that no one ever entered. The strange sounds that sometimes echoed through the heating vents late at night. Sounds that might have been machinery or might have been something far more disturbing. He might have questioned why Eleanor insisted he drink a special tonic she prepared each evening to maintain his health during the winter months. He might have wondered about the increasing periods of lost time he experienced after consuming this tonic, hours that vanished from his memory completely, leaving only vague impressions of laboratory equipment, the scent of chemicals, and Eleanor's voice asking questions he couldn't quite recall. Most importantly, he might have investigated the strange marks that began appearing on his body. Tiny puncture wounds on his arms that Eleanor dismissed as insect bites, surgical-looking scars in places easily hidden by clothing. But Thomas noticed none of these things, or if he did, he rationalized them away. Eleanor's world was too seductive, her attention too flattering, her promises too enticing to permit doubt. By the time he began to realize something was terribly wrong, he was already too compromised to escape. The breaking point came in February 1883, when Thomas discovered the journal. He had been tasked with organizing a collection of medical texts in Eleanor's study while she attended a board meeting at the county hospital where she was a major benefactor. Reaching behind a row of leather-bound volumes, he dislodged a thin black book that had been hidden there. It fell open to a page filled with Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. Subject 16 continues to respond poorly to the experimental serum. Increased dosage has resulted in accelerated tissue degradation and cognitive decline. Termination scheduled for March 15, 1882. Subject 17, TR, shows significantly more promise. Initial blood work indicates superior compatibility with the formula. Preliminary injections have produced no adverse reactions. If current protocols continue to yield positive results, full transfusion will commence by April 1883. The clinical tone, the reference to himself as Subject 17, the casual mention of another subject's termination, all of it struck Thomas with the force of physical blow. Pages of similar notes documented Eleanor's systematic experimentation on young men over a period of years. Detailed anatomical drawings, chemical formulas, and records of procedures performed filled the journal's pages. Most disturbing were the photographs tucked between the pages, clinical images of men strapped to operating tables, their bodies showing progressive stages of what the notes called transformation. The final images of each subject were too horrific to be believed. Human forms distorted beyond recognition, tissue and bone restructured into impossible configurations. And scattered throughout were references to something called the Essex Society, names of prominent citizens, dates of meetings, and cryptic mentions of the great work and transcendence through biological evolution. As Thomas struggled to process what he was seeing, he heard Eleanor's carriage returning up the long drive. With shaking hands, he replaced the journal but not before tearing out several pages as evidence, including a list of names that appeared to be past victims and current members of the mysterious Essex Society. That night, feigning illness to avoid drinking the usual tonic, Thomas waited until the household was asleep before attempting to flee. He had packed a small bag and written a letter to his fiancée warning her of the danger, which he planned to mail from town. But as he crept down the main staircase, he discovered that escape would not be so simple. Eleanor was waiting in the foyer, seated calmly in a high-backed chair as if expecting him. She wore a laboratory apron over her dress, her hands covered by surgical gloves stained with substances Thomas didn't want to identify. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice your consciousness expanding, Thomas?" she asked, her voice carrying that same warmth that had first drawn him in. "The tonic suppresses awareness, yes, but it also creates a connection between us. I can feel when one of my subjects begins to resist." Thomas backed away, clutching the stolen journal pages. "What are you doing to us? Those men in the photographs, what did you turn them into?" Eleanor sighed as if disappointed by his limited understanding. "Not turn into, Thomas. Evolve into. Human potential remains tragically constrained by biological limitations. My work, our work at the Essex Society, is to transcend those limitations, to create the next stage of human evolution." She stood, moving toward him with measured steps. "The failures you saw were necessary sacrifices on the path to perfection. But you're different. Your body accepts the serum in ways the others didn't. You could be the breakthrough we've sought for decades." "Those men," Thomas managed, his voice breaking. "You killed them." "No," Eleanor corrected with genuine conviction. "I elevated them. Those who survived the process have ascended to forms you cannot yet comprehend. The others were regrettable losses in pursuit of greater knowledge." As she spoke, Thomas noticed movement on the landing above. Shapes that seemed human but moved with disturbing, jerky motions, their proportions subtly wrong in ways that triggered deep, instinctive horror. "My earlier successes," Eleanor explained, following his gaze. "Not perfect, but functional. They assist with the more physical aspects of my work." In that moment, Thomas realized he was not dealing merely with a murderer, but with something far more dangerous, a visionary whose brilliance had curdled into madness, whose scientific genius had been twisted to serve monstrous ends. Eleanor Blackwood didn't see herself as evil. She saw herself as pioneering a new future for humanity, regardless of the cost. Thomas ran. Not toward the front door, which he now realized was being guarded by one of the misshapen figures, but toward the back of the house. Eleanor's laugh followed him as he fled through the kitchen and out into the winter night, the freezing air shocking his lungs as he raced across the moonlit grounds toward the road to town. He never made it to Salem City. A half-mile from the Blackwood estate, a carriage intercepted him. Inside was Judge William Harmon, one of Salem County's most respected citizens and, as Thomas now knew from the stolen pages, a high-ranking member of the Essex Society. "My dear boy," the judge said with seemingly genuine regret, "you've made a terrible mistake. Eleanor only wants what's best for you, what's best for all of us." Thomas's last conscious thought before the chloroform-soaked cloth covered his face was that Eleanor's network reached far beyond her mansion walls, into every corner of Salem County's power structure. He awoke strapped to an operating table in a laboratory hidden behind the locked doors of the mansion's third floor. Eleanor moved around him, preparing instruments and checking glass vials of amber liquid. She was speaking, but not to him. "The final phase requires significant blood replacement, approximately 60% of total volume," she explained to the small group of well-dressed men and women observing from the edges of the room. Thomas recognized several prominent citizens among them. The mayor, the bank president, his fiancée's father, Dr. Wilson. Previous subjects failed at this stage due to cellular rejection. Eleanor continued in the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. "But Subject 17 has shown remarkable adaptation to the preliminary injections. His genetic structure is proving far more malleable." "And you believe he'll survive the complete transformation?" Dr. Wilson asked, studying Thomas with clinical detachment rather than recognition. "I believe he may be the breakthrough we've sought since 1865, Eleanor replied. "The serum derived from the Egyptian artifacts has been refined significantly. Combined with the electrical stimulation methods we've developed, cellular reorganization should proceed without the deterioration we observed in previous trials." As they discussed his fate in scientific terms, Thomas realized the true horror of his situation. These weren't cultists or madmen. They were respected community leaders, educated professionals who had rationalized unspeakable acts in the name of progress. Their detachment, their intellectual curiosity about his suffering, was more terrifying than any ranting zealot could have been. "Please," he pleaded, looking directly at Dr. Wilson. You know me. You welcomed me into your home. Your daughter and I. Margaret will be told you've died of pneumonia, Dr. Wilson interrupted calmly. She'll grieve, of course, but she's young. She'll recover. The casual dismissal of his existence, of his humanity, broke something in Thomas. In that moment, he understood that to these people, he wasn't a person at all. He was a specimen, a stepping stone toward their twisted vision of evolutionary advancement. As Eleanor prepared to begin the procedure, an unexpected interruption changed everything. Mrs. Winters, Eleanor's longtime housekeeper, burst into the laboratory, her face pale with panic. "Federal marshals at the gate," she gasped. "Sheriff Cooper is with them, and they have warrants." The assembled society members exchanged alarmed glances. Eleanor alone remained calm, methodically continuing her preparations. "How many?" she asked. "At least a dozen," Mrs. Winters replied. "And they know, Miss Eleanor. They have documents, photographs. Someone has betrayed us." For the first time, Thomas saw uncertainty flicker across Eleanor's confident features. "Secure the lower laboratories," she ordered. "Destroy the records. Protocol 7 for all active subjects." As the Essex Society members rushed to comply, Thomas realized with growing horror what Protocol 7 likely meant: the elimination of evidence, including any surviving experimental subjects. His death, and possibly the deaths of others still held somewhere on the property, had just been ordered as calmly as one might request tea. But fate intervened in the form of chaos. As the society members scattered to destroy evidence, the distant sound of the front door being forced open echoed through the mansion. Shouts and running footsteps indicated that law enforcement had breached the perimeter far faster than expected. In the confusion, Dr. Wilson, perhaps experiencing a moment of conscience or simply calculating his own best chances for survival, loosened Thomas's restraints before fleeing with the others. Weak but determined, Thomas freed himself completely. Eleanor had already disappeared through a hidden door behind one of the laboratory cabinets. For a moment, Thomas considered pursuing her, driven by rage and a desire for justice. Instead, he chose to save himself and potentially other victims still imprisoned in the house. Staggering into the hallway, he encountered two federal marshals working their way methodically through the third floor. "Help," he managed, collapsing against the wall. "There are others below." The raid on the Blackwood mansion that February night uncovered horrors that would shock the nation. Beneath the ornate rooms where Salem County's elite had dined and danced, federal investigators discovered a warren of laboratories and holding cells. 5 young men were found alive in various stages of Eleanor's treatments, their bodies and minds damaged beyond complete recovery. Evidence suggested that others had died recently, their remains disposed of in acid baths in a sub-basement accessible only through hidden passages. The documentation seized from Eleanor's records room painted a picture of systematic abduction, experimentation, and murder stretching back to the end of the Civil War. The Egyptian artifacts mentioned in her notes, allegedly discovered during an archaeological expedition funded by the Blackwood family in 1865, contained ancient biological material that Eleanor had spent years studying, extracting, and synthesizing into the serum she believed would transcend human limitations. Most disturbing was the involvement of the Essex Society, whose membership included over 30 of Salem County's most prominent citizens. Founded originally as a scientific research group, the society had gradually evolved into something far more sinister under Eleanor's influence, a cabal dedicated to creating a new form of humanity through horrific experimentation on unwilling subjects. Thomas Reed's testimony proved crucial to understanding the full scope of Eleanor Blackwood's operation. Despite suffering permanent health effects from the substances she had administered, he provided detailed accounts of the society's practices, including names of members and descriptions of procedures he had witnessed or experienced. They didn't see themselves as murderers, he told investigators. That's what made them so dangerous. In their minds, they were visionaries creating humanity's future, and the lives they took were necessary sacrifices for progress. The arrests that followed rocked Salem County to its foundations. Judges, doctors, business leaders, and politicians were taken into custody, their respectable facades crumbling as evidence of their complicity came to light. Some claimed they had been coerced or misled about the nature of the experiments, but Eleanor's meticulous records told a different story, one of willing participation and enthusiastic support. Eleanor Blackwood herself disappeared the night of the raid, along with her most loyal associates. Despite one of the largest manhunts in New Jersey history, Including coordinated searches across multiple states, she was never found. Reported sightings emerged for years afterward, in Boston, New Orleans, San Francisco, even London and Paris, but none could be confirmed. The trials of the Essex Society members became a national sensation. Newspapers from New York to Chicago sent reporters to cover proceedings that exposed not just individual crimes but the corruption of an entire community's power structure. The prosecution presented evidence that local law enforcement had deliberately ignored disappearances, that county officials had falsified death certificates, and that financial institutions had helped conceal the movement of funds used to finance the operation. Dr. Wilson turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing testimony that implicated his fellow society members while attempting to minimize his own involvement. His daughter Margaret, devastated by the dual betrayal of her father and the truth about her fiancé's ordeal, became an advocate for the victims, establishing a foundation to support their ongoing medical care. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper whose last-minute warning had accelerated the federal raid, revealed that she had been the one to alert authorities after years of witnessing horrors she could no longer ignore. It was she who had secretly collected evidence and established contact with a federal investigator specializing in cases of scientific fraud and medical crimes. "I waited too long," she testified, her voice heavy with regret. "I knew what was happening, but I was afraid. So many died because of my cowardice." The 5 surviving victims faced difficult futures. The substances Eleanor had injected had caused permanent physiological changes, enhanced strength and sensory perception in some cases, but also neurological damage, unpredictable mutations, and chronic pain. They received the best medical care available, but 1880s medicine had no framework for understanding, let alone treating, the changes Eleanor's serum had wrought on their bodies. Thomas Reed, whose testimony was instrumental in securing convictions, struggled with both physical and psychological aftermath. The partial treatments he had received left him with periods of accelerated healing and abnormal sensory perception, but also with seizures and episodes of lost time. He withdrew from public life after the trials, retreating to a small property in the Adirondacks purchased with funds from a government settlement awarded to the victims. In 1885, 2 years after the Blackwood case broke, a package arrived at Thomas's remote cabin. It contained a single photograph of Eleanor Blackwood standing in what appeared to be a modern laboratory, looking exactly as she had the night of her escape. Written on the back in her distinctive handwriting was a simple message: "The work continues. Evolution cannot be stopped." Federal investigators were unable to determine where the package had originated, though the postmark indicated it had been mailed from Philadelphia. Increased security measures were implemented around Thomas and the other survivors, but no further contact was attempted. The Blackwood mansion itself became an object of morbid fascination. After being thoroughly documented by investigators, it was scheduled for demolition, but before this could occur, it burned to the ground in a fire of suspicious origin that consumed all remaining evidence. Local rumors suggested that members of the Essex Society who had escaped prosecution had destroyed it to protect secrets still hidden within its walls. The laboratories beneath the mansion were sealed with concrete, the entrance buried and disguised. The land remained vacant for decades, with locals avoiding it due to persistent stories of strange sounds, unexplained lights, and disturbing sensations experienced by those who ventured too close to the former estate grounds. In academic and scientific circles, the Blackwood case prompted increased scrutiny of independent research and experimentation. Medical ethics committees were established at major institutions, and legislation was introduced to regulate biological and chemical research, early precursors to the oversight systems that would develop more fully in the 20th century. For Salem County, the after-effects lingered for generations. The community's trust in its institutions was shattered, its social hierarchies disrupted, its reputation permanently tarnished. Many families associated with the Essex Society left the area, changing their names and establishing new identities elsewhere. Those who remained lived under the shadow of suspicion, their descendants burdened by association even decades later. In 1932, nearly 50 years after the case, a New York physician published a paper on a rare blood disorder found in 7 patients across the eastern seaboard. The condition, characterized by unusual cellular structures and enhanced regenerative properties, defied conventional medical understanding. What connected these cases, though the doctor didn't know it, was that all 7 patients were descendants of the Essex Society members who had fled Salem County after the scandal. Eleanor Blackwood's experiments, it seemed, had effects that reached beyond her immediate victims. Whatever she had created in her laboratories, whatever evolutionary leap she had attempted to force, had left genetic traces that manifested generations later in subtle but measurable ways. The final chapter of the Blackwood story remains unwritten. Federal records related to the case were sealed in 1933 after a series of unexplained deaths among investigators who had begun re-examining evidence. These records, scheduled to be opened in 1983, mysteriously disappeared from the National Archives in 1982, just months before their declassification date. Occasional reports still emerge of research facilities discovered in remote locations, containing equipment and documentation suggesting connections to Eleanor's work. In 2018, a private collector purchased a set of journals at auction that appeared to be written in Eleanor Blackwood's hand, dated as recently as 1923, 40 years after her disappearance and when she would have been in her 90s. Authentication experts confirmed the handwriting match, but could not explain how she could have been alive and active at such an advanced age. Thomas Reed lived until 1947, reaching the improbable age of 89 despite health issues that doctors had predicted would cut his life short decades earlier. In his final years, he granted a single interview to a medical historian documenting the Blackwood case. His parting statement suggests that Eleanor's work may have had consequences no one fully understood. She believed she was creating the future of humanity, Thomas said. What terrifies me, after all these years, is the possibility that in some way she succeeded. I feel it in my blood, something alien, something that doesn't belong. And I wonder how many others carry it too, not knowing what sleeps in their veins, waiting to be awakened. Today, Salem County appears to have moved beyond its dark history. The sites associated with the Blackwood case have been built over or repurposed. Few locals openly discuss the events of 1883. But in medical databases across the country, cases still appear occasionally that puzzle specialists: unusual blood compositions, inexplicable cellular structures, patients with accelerated healing or heightened senses that medical science cannot explain. And in university archives and private collections, researchers continue to seek connections between these modern mysteries and the experiments conducted in a mansion laboratory over a century ago, where a brilliant woman's vision of human evolution spawned horrors that may still echo through bloodlines today. What do you think? Did Eleanor Blackwood's work truly end with the raid on her mansion, or might her experiments have continued somewhere else, their effects still rippling through subsequent generations? Could there be people walking among us today whose ancestors were part of the Essex Society's evolutionary program? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this dark chapter of American history, subscribe to Echoes of Darkness and hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss our explorations of the shadows that lurk beneath our nation's polished surface. The past may be prologue, and some stories never truly end. They simply wait in the darkness for someone brave enough to shine a light on them once more.